begin. Good day everyone and welcome to today's webinar. At this time all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later you will have the opportunity to ask questions during the question and answer session. You may ask a question by typing it into the dialog box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, or you may press star and 1 on your phone to ask a live question. Please note this call is being recorded. It is now my pleasure to turn the conference over to Ms. Sarah Vogel. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sarah Vogel. I direct the Environmental Health Program here at EDS, and I want to welcome the folks on the phone and on the web as well, and really appreciate you for all taking some time out of your afternoon to join us. I'm just going to repeat what the operator said for those on the phone. So to reach an operator, you just hit the star key and then 0, and then to ask a question, you'll hit star and 1. And then if you want to post a question online, just type it into that dialog box and we will read it out loud. So today I want to talk to you about why I feel, and we feel at EDF, we have the best chance really in a generation to protect our health by getting hazardous chemicals out of the products we use every day. I want to first introduce my colleague who's with me today, Tom Murray. He directs the Corporate Partnership Program here at EDS. Tom and I are actually both new parents, so this is shameless photos of our children. My daughter Kate just turned 8 months old, and Tom's second child, Abigail, joined their family, which includes a son, Parker, who's 3, and Abby was born in February. So the work that we're sharing with you today is actually not just a EDF strategic priority, but it's a personal and passion and interest to both of us. At EDF, we're pursuing 2 levers of change to address hazardous chemicals in the marketplace. First, by reforming the policies that govern the use of chemicals, which right now are really failing to protect Americans, and second, by spurring corporate leadership to get harmful chemicals out of products more immediately. And we want to just share updates on some exciting opportunities in both of these arenas, and then we really want to turn it over to you all for questions and thoughts. So the world that Tom and I want for our children is the same one I think we all want, which is one that we can all thrive in. The problem, of course, today is that we live in an bit of an industrial chemical soup. The air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, and many of the household products that we use every day can expose us to a whole host of different chemicals that, of course, enter our bodies at different stages of life and can contribute to poor disease and health outcomes. So just how many different chemicals? The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention looks at a sample of American blood every several years and actually have detected several hundred industrial chemicals, including in pregnant women. And what are the risks of some of these exposures? And here's where emerging research has been increasingly linking everyday exposure to some chronic diseases that are on the rise, certain kinds of cancers, infertility, Parkinson's, behavioral and learning problems, reproductive disorders. And we know, in part, there are chemicals present in the environment that can impair children's brain development. And I'm sure everyone, I've had a chance to talk to some of the folks here in the room, so there's people who are better experts at this than I am. But we're familiar with the story of lead and decades-long efforts to get lead out of paint and gasoline that had huge public health impacts. But there are other chemicals in the environment that we're learning can also impair children's health, brain development. And you may recall back in the 1970s, there was evidence that toxic flame retardants that were being used in children's pajamas could actually cause genetic mutations. And at the time, one of those chemicals was banned from children's pajamas, but it found new uses in particular foam used in couches and pillows, even nursing pillows, and a host of children's products. Today, a vast majority of Americans carry measurable amounts of flame retardants in their bodies, and we're increasingly learning about their neurological impacts. We actually, at EDF, sampled some couches in different congressional offices and found that about half of them contain toxic chemicals. So you may be thinking, well, that explains what's going on in Washington. But in all seriousness, this is just an example of the sort of unacceptable situation that we're living with today. And for decades, we've found one toxic flame retardant and simply replaced it with another. And this has been in part due to some of the major failings in our chemical safety law, and that's the Toxic Substances Control Act. That law has been so weak that really less than 3% of the approximately 80,000 chemicals that are available for use, we actually don't know how many are actually being used, have ever been tested for health and safety effects, and only five have ever been regulated. The EPA, which is the agency responsible for maintaining chemical safety in this case, has been generally powerless to act, and the law has not been updated in nearly 40 years. For more than a decade, EDF has been calling attention to this problem, and we've been building political pressure to reform the law. And now we feel that we have the best chance, really, that we've ever had to do this. Back in March, two senators, Senator Tom Udall from New Mexico, a Democrat, and Senator David Vitter, a Republican from Louisiana, joined with 10 Democrats and 10 Republicans to co-sponsor a new bill that would significantly, in our assessment, improve the chemical safety system at the federal level. So it's not often you hear about bipartisan leadership on an issue that affects every American. EDF's role, we've been playing a key advisor to ongoing negotiations for many years now on what is a compromise bill. So that Senate bill, which is called the Frank R. Lautenberg Chemical Safety for the 21st Century Act, gives the EPA, for the first time, the actual mandate to evaluate all new chemicals and the thousands of chemicals that have already come into commerce, and they have to evaluate them for their safety. It does explicitly require protection of vulnerable populations, including pregnant women, infants, and children. It sets aggressive enforceable deadlines to take action, and it gives the EPA greater authority to actually get information, testing information, filling that large gap. So we do believe it fixes some of the biggest problems with our current law and could result in better protections for people. It's important to note that the legislation didn't just arise sort of overnight. It's really the culmination of a decade of legislative effort, most of it led by the late Frank R. Lautenberg, who grasped really early on the need to reform the law, who introduced bills in consecutive years in 2005 and 8 and 10 and 12, and finally in 13 with Senator Vitter. And he took the risk of opening a bipartisan pathway forward. Environmental and health groups are taking a spectrum of positions on the bill, and some of them have raised continuous concerns with the legislation. We understand a lot of those concerns, and we're continuing to work with Senate leaders, the environmental and really the medical community to get the strongest bill enacted into law. So while the current bill is imperfect, it's a compromise, we feel that we can't hold out for the perfect bill because it results in no progress at all. And we believe there are huge consequences to continued inaction. Every day, children are born with hundreds of chemicals in their bloodstream, and as a new mother, I do feel this deeply, and I feel we can't accept the status quo any longer. And that's also why we work on multiple fronts. So as we've been increasing pressure on Congress to act, we've been working with major corporations to move hazardous chemicals really off the shelves. So by working with leading corporations, we're demonstrating not only that it's politically feasible, but technically and economically feasible to bring safer products into our homes. So with that, I want to turn it over to Tom to talk about some of that work with companies.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And I agree, this is really exciting progress, especially when you think about the fact that we've been waiting decades for regulatory improvements. And I think that's a big part, to me, of what makes this combo kind of a really powerful one-two punch, right? That the work that we're doing with leading companies is a really strong complementary and supporting strategy to the policy reform work that Sarah just talked about. I think that by helping prove what's possible in the marketplace today, we can build the case for the policy reform that we need to really solve the toxics issue at scale. And there's good news on the private sector leadership front as well. I think from the retailers that we work with to product and chemical companies, we're on the verge of a moment in time where real change is about to happen that's going to help make all of us safer. I'm sure, I would assume most of us in the room use personal care products this morning when we woke up, soaps and shampoos and lotions and other things, and we all want to know, we all want to believe that those are products that are safe for us to use, safe for our families. And we're not alone or unique in that. I think customers around the globe are speaking up and beginning to demand simpler, safer, healthier products, and they've got the attention of leading companies. The ones we're talking to are listening and see this as a concern and a business opportunity. So the big breakthrough for us in working with companies on chemicals came about 2 years ago when we had the opportunity to guide Walmart, the largest retailer in the world, in becoming the very first retailer to announce a comprehensive chemicals policy, a policy that identifies and phases out targeted harmful chemicals from the products on store shelves. Walmart's chemical policy, because of their scale, their policy impacts tens of thousands of household and personal care products, lotions, shampoos, soaps, household cleaners, things we all use every day. And these are products in the marketplace that are worth billions of dollars in sales. It's a really significant policy. And we're at a point now where we are helping put that policy into action. I think because of EDF's unique combination of really strong science from Sarah's team and years of working and expertise on supply chain and business expertise, that we're in a position to help Walmart develop that policy, but also now take that policy to other retailers and other companies and scale the impacts. And, you know, that's not to say that Walmart alone, actually, because of its size and the purchasing power of the company, the actions that company takes have ripple effects that go far beyond Walmart store shelves. What they're doing with their policy will actually make products safer no matter where you shop. And I think that's the real power of this collaboration and the hope. And what's exciting us now is that we're beginning to see those ripple effects in the marketplace. So major manufacturers, companies like Johnson & Johnson or Colgate-Palmolive, have recently announced that they're beginning to phase out select hazardous chemicals from the products that they make. Clorox and SC Johnson recently announced ambitious new policies to begin to disclose all of the chemical ingredients that they use to make their products. That's key. That kind of transparency is really key. We're nowhere near that at this point. And we're also excited that other retailers are kind of following Walmart's lead. Companies like CVS and Target have adopted their own chemical policies. We think this is really promising. There's a lot of great momentum that we're starting to see happen in the industry leadership space, and we are eager to get your thoughts and your comments on this work and also what Sarah talked about that's happening in Washington, D.C. But before we open that up to discussion, I want to quickly talk to you about a new and emerging opportunity that we're really excited about, a new opportunity to address harmful chemicals and a different category of products, food. You know, when it comes to the food that we put in our mouths every day, the federal system for protecting us from harmful chemicals is also broken. and out of date. It's over 50 years old. And what I've come to learn through this work is that of the more than 10,000 chemical additives allowed in food, only about half have been tested for safety. And those additives include known hazards like phthalates and BPA. There's another challenge here as well, which is that there's a loophole in the law that governs food additives, and it's a loophole that has allowed companies to introduce over 1,000 new chemicals into food products without even having to notify the government. And we're using chemical food additives for a huge variety of reasons. We use them to color our foods. We use them to preserve our foods and make them more stable on the shelf. We use them to improve consistency. We use them to add flavor. So they're used for a wide range of things. And many of the chemicals, in fact, probably most of the chemicals used in food today did not exist 50 years ago when the laws were put in place to govern this issue. So we're at a point now where top officials from the Food and Drug Administration, the agency in charge of governing this issue, have admitted that they can't keep up. Meanwhile, consumers around the world, people like all of us in this room, are speaking up and demanding simpler, healthier foods. And we've got an agency that's unable to keep up with that demand and kind of not empowered to do it. And probably many of you have seen that there's increasing coverage around food and health issues in media. Some of you have probably read about recent scares, things like plastic softeners that are used to make yoga mats pliable, also showing up in Subway bread, known carcinogens used in the caramel coloring in Pepsi products. That said, we're optimistic. We're optimistic because of the momentum we've seen happening through the work we've been doing with Walmart on household and consumer products. As a result, Walmart has asked us to help them think about what a similar strategy would be for addressing chemical food additives in the products they sell. And as we're working with Walmart to begin to develop those strategies for them, we're also talking to other manufacturers and other retailers who are facing pressure to meet consumer expectations of their own. So I think that we're at this moment where, similar to the momentum we've kicked off around household products and personal care products, there's this big opportunity to really leverage the supply chain to improve the safety of the food we eat today, but also to build pressure for an improved regulatory system to improve the safety of the food we'll be eating tomorrow. I'll turn that back over to Sarah.
Sure. Thank you, Tom. So all of this, I've been working in this field for a while, and I know some of you have been working in it much longer than I, but I actually feel very optimistic. I feel like this issue is had a lot of movement. I see a lot of promise, and I like to hope that in 20 years' time, I can assure my daughter that she doesn't have to actually worry about the food that she eats and the products that she brings into her home, and that she can shop anywhere, and that all Americans can have access to safer, healthier products and a healthier environment. When I often talk to people or family members about this issue, the common question is, after how do you keep doing that, it's so depressing, is what should they buy, what should they do? And the truth is, we do know that there are some modest steps that you can take each day that don't, require going, say, to Whole Foods, but that can limit some of your exposure, like avoiding microwaving in plastic, or trying to use HEPA filters or wet cloths to remove some of the dust in the home that can actually accumulate flame retardant chemicals, for example. But we can't actually shop or clean our way out of this problem. When we step outside our doors, there are chemicals in the environment and communities that we live in that's just beyond our immediate control. So that's why we really feel at EDF we need a collective change that comes through leadership from companies and from strong national protections for all of us. And I think it's not an exaggeration to say that the health and sort of well-being of our children and really their children are at stake in this effort. So I'm really eager to hear your thoughts and open up a conversation. So for those of you on the phone, if you want to ask a question, please hit *1 on your phone, and you can also type in those questions in the dialog box. Yeah.
Will the Lautenberg Act as proposed now, will it apply just domestically? I mean, obviously a big issue is the growing amount of the food chain and supply chain that is international, and so will it have the ability to capture that? Will it limit stuff at the border?
That is a moving target right now. There's a whole import section that is still being negotiated. We think in the right direction, at least I can say that today. But it is a challenge, and if some of you saw the 60 Minutes piece on lumber liquidators, that really emphasized, and actually that was timely because that helped highlight the importance of getting that import section correct.
I mean, one of the great things about what you're doing with Walmart is, and I've seen this in the packaging business, beyond legislation, beyond regulations, well, there's such a big driver that other people, if they meet Walmart's packaging requirements, they're not going to package differently for another chain. So it does, as you said, drives change absent legislation just to meet Walmart's purchasing criteria. So I guess that would be international no matter what Lautenberg ends up.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that question's come up, and it's something that we don't quite have the evidence for yet. The policy on the chemicals piece was very much for Walmart USA, but because they're just now starting to implement, one thing that we'll be interested to look at is how is it impacting their global supply chain. Yeah.
There are good indicators, though, of whether it's packaging, like you've talked about, for concentrated laundry detergent and things. Those have been scalable solutions that have gone international, and if you've changed the packaging for Tide on the shelves at Walmart, the packaging has changed at Target and CVS and other places as well. So that's certainly one of the attractions of why we've chosen to partner up with Walmart.
I'm surprised there isn't more focus on the gender bending aspect of so many of these substances. In my view, that's a way to get people's attention. That could be the 60 Minutes that actually galvanizes people. So how does the endocrine disrupting part play in the cards that we're putting on the table?
Well, it's certainly both a mechanism and a health outcome that we talk about a lot with this work. I didn't highlight it here. I mean, I in passing talked about reproductive disorders, and some of the, brain and developmental issues can be through endocrine mechanisms. We do a fair amount of science-based work here as well. So one thing that we've been working on is how do you harness some of the new chemical screening tools and technologies to better identify things like endocrine disrupting compounds. And so that's more on a technical side. I actually think some people have been brought into this issue through the endocrine disruption concerns. We worked, even with the Walmart work, when we were talking to them about how do you prioritize chemicals, we're wary of saying an endocrine disruptor is worse than a known carcinogen, that's worse than a known, developmental toxicant. So part of it is, supporting sort of mechanisms for identifying endocrine disruptors, because that's a big problem, but also making sure that it doesn't over-swamp the conversation in terms of impact. Can I go here and then this one?
Yes. With regard to endocrine disruptors, it's not just the reproductive thing. The brominated flame retardants are potent disruptors of the thyroid gland. And the thyroid gland has immense impacts on developmental processes and metabolism and behavior. And, there's been such a, emphasis on the reproductive hormones and a neglect of the thyroid and who knows what other endocrine. We have an epidemic of diabetes in this country. Is that possibly that some chemicals are interfering with insulin? I don't know. People don't seem to be studying that. That was one point. The second question is with regard to the Lautenberg Bill. You made a statement, I think it was a fine statement, saying don't let the perfect, prevent you from doing something good just because it's not perfect. And I'm wondering, did you talk with other environmental groups before this whole thing to try to get more on board with this, because I got the email from EDF on one day saying, got this great bill introduced. And the following day, I got email from other environmental groups saying, this awful bill has just been introduced into Congress. And I am sure when, I hope it's a when, not an if, the bill, there's hearings on this bill, that, you know, EDF will be coming there testifying in favor of it, and a slew of other environmental groups are going to be opposing it. And this is really bad. And I'm just hoping you can, you know, meet with them, get together, and try to work out some détente with the other environmental groups.
But I think historically, you guys have been unusually pragmatic, which I think one of the reasons EDF has been good. You've worked with industry that other guys don't. And if some of the holier-than-thou environmental groups will not engage, I mean, you engage with chemical companies and petrochem companies because that's where the biggest issue is. And the groups that won't engage with the other side are far less effective than EDF has been historically.
They may not engage with them, but they could be perhaps persuaded that this bill is a step forward. It's not perfect, but it's better than what we have, and a stronger bill would never pass this Congress. And I think they are rational, maybe not all of them, but the ones that I'm involved with are rational organizations that should be able to come to a détente with EDF on this so that you're not having on opposite sides.
So I'll start with the second one and just make a comment on the thyroid mechanisms. We definitely have dialogue, and you know, part of this 10-year campaign, advocacy campaign, initially EDF actually was a co-founder of a very large coalition of environmental groups, and the idea there was to raise the general awareness that this law needs to be reformed. When it's come to making very pointed decisions and about policy and strategic decisions, that's where people of the spectrum have started to be challenged. And so we continue to have many conversations with most folks that will pick up the phone. But no, we are in close dialogue with many of the bigger partners and traditional partners that we have. We've also used it as an opportunity to talk to a lot of the different medical and disease organizations who are actually starting to hear more about this, who tend to be a little bit more in a pragmatic approach because like EDF, they may have a bipartisan approach because they're trying to just, you know, prevent their disease, and they know that it takes everything, you know, and both parties should be at the table doing this, which is EDF's notion that both parties should be engaged in protecting the environment and had been at one point. So we hear you on that, and we want that to be certainly to be the outcome, and we're hopeful because there continue to be negotiations that's what we'll see when the Senate marks up this bill. The thyroid point's a great one. I'll just put a plug for some other work that we do this June at UC Davis Mind Institute. We're bringing, in partnership with the National Institutes for Environmental Health and EPA and the National Parkinson's Foundation and Autism Speaks, are bringing kind of leading neurodevelopmental and neurodegenerative experts together with the folks at NIHS and EPA to talk about the impacts of chemicals on these disease pathways. So there's going to be a lot of thyroid specialists in the room, and so we're really excited about that meeting out. So let me know if anyone's interested. So I think we have some questions from the phone.
We do. Operator?
Yes, we have a question from Linda Bailey.
Yes, thank you. This is kind of a two-part question as I was listening to other people. I'm just wondering, one of my big concerns is air and water and chemicals in air and water. Could you say something about, in terms of the danger to the public, what the balance is with the chemicals that are being released into air and water in regards to or comparison to the chemicals that are in food and consumer products? That is one part of my question. My other question is, here in California, there seems to be this big concern about inoculations, and there's a bill up, and I'm not exactly sure where, in terms of people not needing to inoculate their children for them to go to school. Could you say something about the chemicals and inoculations? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You know, I should defer to some of my experts in the room on the water issues. I think it's, from my perspective, there's no sort of simple answer to your first question. It's going to be dependent on the population. It's going to be dependent on the individual themselves, where they live. You know, do they live near a Superfund site, in which case perhaps you know, your exposure, you're a little bit more concerned about your water exposure. Do you live near a major highway? You may be much more concerned about your air quality. So it really, I hate to answer with a, it depends, but it actually does truly depend. On the vaccine issue, this is an issue EDF doesn't work on, but as someone trained in public health, I firmly believe in vaccination. And think everyone should get their children vaccinated, and I have vaccinated Kate and continue to. I think the concerns there were with mercury preservatives. Those have been removed from all children's vaccines, with, I think, the exception of the flu vaccine. So,
thank you.
Thank you. We have questions from the web.
We do. And before I read it, I'll remind folks participating online that if you want to ask a question, just hit star and 1 or type it in the dialog box and we'll read it aloud. This question is, to what extent are there chemicals coming ultimately from the use of byproducts of petroleum refinement? Will their use decline with a shift toward renewable energy?
That's an interesting one. That would be for natural gas. No. Well, part of the issue there, I think what the question may be driving at is concerns around burning of coal, major combustion byproducts, where we know that there are health impacts. Obviously, burning of coal is a major contributor to air toxics, and that is not a good thing. And certainly, renewables can improve our air quality, and that's, you know, very much what we're looking at. There's obviously a lot of local and community-based concerns around gas and oil extraction, even though natural gas, the burning of natural gas at the source can reduce air exposure. But you know, we have concerns around ozone pollution and in areas where there's a lot of hydraulic fracturing. So it's kind of a scattershot answer, but I would think renewables would be a significant improvement over burning, particularly of coal.
What about the use of plastics?
Oh, you mean, so using petroleum and plastics? Yeah, I was thinking air. The question wasn't about air. Well, I mean,
it's everywhere.
It's, yeah, it's I mean, that's the thing. So, and you can build a lot of plastics from bio-based products too. So it's not certain that those will necessarily be, by definition, safer products, depending on what else you put in those in those plastics. Yes.
There's growing controversy over an alarm about glyphosate in the ag sector. And I just noticed in the most recent issue of Consumer Reports, a page 32, if any of you are subscribers, with a, I thought, a very interesting comment, which if I could read it, it will set the discussion. Now there will be even more glyphosate sprayed thanks to the EPA's approval in late 2014 of the herbicide Enlist Duo, a combination of glyphosate and another chemical herbicide called 2,4-D. That latest approval has drawn criticism. Quote, I think if the EPA had followed the mandates of the Food Quality Protection Act, there's no way that they could have ever approved this very substantial increase in the use of glyphosate. This is from Philip Landrigan at Mount Sinai, who, if his name is not familiar to you, I do not know of a medical researcher with decades of experience more into trying to awaken the public's concern for children in particular. So he comments that Enlist Duo the approval was based on old studies and that the agency, that's EPA, was wrong to approve it without adhering to an additional child safety protection required by the Act. So, you know, this is a real issue. Glyphosate, Roundup, popularly known, is ubiquitous. So is this particular chemical on the radar screen, and what mind share does it occupy in the spectrum you're looking at?
We actually haven't been involved in that work. We make a strange distinction in terms of we haven't done, ironically, because it's where EDF started, we haven't done a lot of work on pesticides. We kind of leave that to our colleagues at NRDC. However, because they've had a sort of pesticide shop there for a while. We have a contributing senior scientist, Chris Portier, who used to run the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Control, the disease registry at CDC, who just came back from Lyon in France, working on the International Agency for Research on Cancer, what's called IARC, review of Roundup. And they determined that it was a probable human carcinogen, which is a big deal, and it has the industry very upset, as you can imagine. So I think this issue is gaining a lot more attention. It is one of the most widely used herbicides in the world, and it's just something that we haven't had the bandwidth for, quite honestly. Yeah.
There's a recent report that I saw that it's Monsanto, right, that makes it?
Yes.
That Monsanto knew decades ago that it was a carcinogen and hid it. This is like the tobacco companies, that they knew and just, stuck it in the, in the back drawer, and have been denying this ever since. So.
Well, they're going to see some interesting challenges for them ahead, because it is a big issue for them. So the politics on this, I think, are going to get seriously heated up.
Just as firstly a historical note of interest to young mothers, and then question sort of following up on what Roger said. As you most know, EDF got its start in struggle to ban DDT. And in the early days, when a small group of EDF called themselves the fundamentalist environmentalists, they decided how they're going to get national attention. So what they did, they chipped in and took a half-page ad in the New York Times. I still have it. There was a picture of a nursing mother, and the byline was, if that mother's milk was in any other container than her body, it would be illegal to transport it across state lines, because the mother's milk was so, all of it, was so contaminated with DDT, and that sort of shocked the nation. So that's a historical note, but moving forward, the 80,000 potential toxins, how are you going to set your priorities? Like we've heard of a few here. I mean, that's you go for sort of a low-hanging fruit, you might say, where corporations like Walmart are cooperating, and then maybe get to the tougher stuff later, or how do you, it's an enormous challenge, right?
It's an enormous challenge. I mean, for example, on the Walmart case, so we first started working with Walmart 7 years ago now, and one of the unique things Walmart did early on was they had actually been, like a lot of retailers, fined pretty heavily in the state of California for illegally disposing hazardous waste. And a lot of this were things like products on the shelves that spilled, and workers cleaned them up and threw it in the trash. And so this is a very condensed story of something that took a long time.
And returns.
And returns, that's right. Yeah. So they set up, basically with a third party, a system whereby their suppliers would have to provide ingredient information to the third party, so that through the barcode, they could figure out how to properly dispose of products. Well, we worked with them and other NGOs to then create another sort of screening tool with that third party to say, can we look at which of these chemicals actually appear on known authoritative lists of, known carcinogens, reproductive toxins. And so we helped create that. And then they basically looked at all that data, and they realized that 40% of the products that they were selling had one or more sort of known hazards. And it was like, okay, what in the world do we do now? That's almost half of our products. So we worked with them in getting to this policy. We worked to try to develop a prioritization scheme. And everybody does it. EPA's done it. The state of California will do it. And you really have to just start with the known universe and then start, defining what your criteria are and begin to just narrow it down. And EPA's done that. They have a set of what they call work plan chemicals. So they have a fairly small universe that they want to start on first. And they're the known bad ones. They're persistent bioaccumulative toxins. They're known carcinogens. So we do have a lot of low-hanging fruit.
It's interesting you mentioned about the barcode, because one of my daughters is training for the New York Marathon, and she has an app on her smartphone from Weight Watchers. And she took me around the supermarket the other day looking at foods. And just by holding the smartphone up to the barcode, it could tell you how many calories were in this and that.
Yeah.
And by extension, that might be a way of getting the word out to the public what's in food and the danger level of it.
Well, certainly increased access to information about nutrition and food safety and product safety is what is driving all of this, right? And I think your question about volume is why we're so passionate about a two-part strategy and answer to this question, right? This is with 80,000 plus chemicals in consumer products and 10,000 chemical food additives. Private sector can't solve this on their own. We can look like Sarah did and prioritize chemicals based on prevalence, based on volume and frequency and top-selling products at companies, and show what's possible. I mean, the power of what we're doing at Walmart is making change with Walmart and other companies like SC Johnson and Colgate-Palmolive and others is showing what's possible today, right? That we're taking the objections to progress, taking the roadblocks to policy change out of the way by showing, no, safer substitutes are available. They're cost effective. We can begin to change the products on the shelf and take those excuses away from the policy conversation, but we're going to need both to kind of raise the bar for everybody.
Well, I think also, in this day and age, transparency goes a long way. I mean, the ability in the old days of a layman to research what an ingredient was and have any sense, it's just totally changed now. And I know my kids' generation, they're far more aware of stuff than we were at a comparable age. And the ability to, on your phone immediately, when you're in the store, Google some ingredient and find out it's got incredible consequences. If we have a more comprehensive labeling act, just like we do for nutrition stuff now, that drives consumer behavior.
Yeah, and it really is on the food side, as we've gotten more involved and had a lot of conversations with Walmart and a few other grocers. They are hearing loud and clear through customer surveys and things that people are demanding. They're assuming that transparency. And there's a real tension, too, because they want the transparency and they want all these kind of new characteristics of food. People want a lot of new flavors and texture. There's a high bar for food, but they want simplicity and transparency at the same time. So these companies are a little bit like, how do we do this? You want to be transparent and you need to be simple at the same time. That's a real... So we're in this interesting discussion of how do you do that? How do you communicate that really effectively for people as opposed to just overwhelming?
Those can be in conflict, you're right. But the other thing you look at, in the old days, companies would do corporate social responsibility statements, and they did them basically as they had to. Nobody read them. I think the generation now reads these things. It influences consumer behavior. When you see somebody say we remediate half our carbon, that may not drive a lot of the population, but there's a subset of younger people that will switch to a bank which is carbon neutral, will switch to a chemical company which is phased out stuff. So it does have a big marketing appeal to millenniums who just say, I'm not going to support a corporation which knowingly either hides what it's doing or makes it more difficult for me to make an informed decision.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's what's unique about the chemical stuff too, right? Because some of the other things you're talking about, energy and carbon, water, waste, packaging, those kind of sustainability initiatives that companies embraced and are still moving forward with, and we've worked with lots of them on those issues, are also about efficiency and operating cost savings. That's not necessarily the case in terms of clear wins and cost savings for some of the chemical stuff. So they're being driven to act on this because of improved science, better connecting, health and environmental impacts of what's happening. Social media and transparency, so access to information has really skyrocketed, and a younger millennial generation that's eating all of that up and more interested in that, and media coverage about that. And then increasingly, whether we're talking to Walmart or Marks and Spencer in Europe or Whole Foods in Austin, Texas, they're all telling us the same thing, which is that their customers are asking for this: simpler, safer, healthy. And it's interesting because it doesn't really matter whether it's Walmart or Whole Foods. And, what's exciting to me about the work with Walmart is the opportunity to democratize safer, healthier food and make it at a price point that's accessible to everybody.
Yeah.
It may be that financial self-interest will help us in the context of reducing healthcare costs. You've seen publicity recently about an unexpected downturn in healthcare costs. I don't know enough to parse that, but the suggestion was that we're starting to see a return on the investment in cleaning up the air, particulate matter, and NOx and CO, and the lung function clearly better in kids, Southern California. So that may be ultimately the way we have to appeal. Just altruism doesn't cut it. That gets you 5% response. There are two chemicals that interest me greatly because of their breadth of relevance and exposure, and I don't know a current status, so perhaps you can tell me where the public thinking is right now. Non-food is triclosan, example in toothpastes and in deodorants. So here is every day potentially people using things on mucous membranes where the tris goes right in. The second is on microwave popcorn and the perfluorooctanoic acid, I don't remember which one, where the remedy is air pop instead of microwave pop. We can live with those changes, threats to our past practice. But if it were pointed out that kids at least were getting, I hope you'll tell me it's better now, a harrowing load of, Teflon compounds through their popcorn, and many teenagers showing these astounding levels of contamination. Can you update me on either or both of those particular chemicals?
On the triclosan, there's been a lot of movement in the private market. A lot of companies are moving away from it in a lot of soap products, with the exception of probably, the exception being Colgate Total, because Colgate went out of its way to get over-the-counter approval for its use of triclosan. Procter & Gamble likes to tell people that Crest never had it, so this isn't, I'm not plugging one or the other, but just for your information, Crest does not have triclosan. So I think that I like to think, for a number of reasons, and what we know about what companies are doing, that it's the end of the road for the wide scale use of triclosan. I know some folks are worried about, I don't know that much about them, something called quats, which are also similar antimicrobials that are being used quite a bit and in a lot of different products. There's been a tiny bit of research on them, but it was one of those compounds that just started showing up in people's labs, and they kind of went, what is this? And then started investigating them, which happens quite a bit. On the kind of PFOAs, you know, DuPont, who'd been a big manufacturer of a lot of them, is still in the process of doing a voluntary phase out of a whole host of them. And so I think the thought is that hopefully we'll begin to see those levels decline in people's bloodstreams. Did you want to add to that?
When
Yeah.
you're done, then
Oh, I mean, that's what, so there, I mean, but we're going to have to watch it over time because the levels have been quite high. I thought you were going to say diacetyl, which is the other compound used in microwave popcorn that deteriorates the lung.
Why do they put it in? Why is it in microwave popcorn?
It's used as like an anti-grease barrier.
Keeps the oil that's popping the popcorn from soaking through the paper. It isn't paper.
And it's used in a lot of packaging for that same reason, anti-cling qualities. So food packaging is very complex. Someone mentioned packaging earlier. It's a very complex product.
Remember they used to be chloroform in toothpaste?
Oh.
You know that?
No, I didn't know that.
It never tastes the same since they took it out.
yes. Yeah, you're mentioning the PFAS reminds me that, I mean, one of the things that the EPA TSCA office was able to do in its own weak way was, you know, when something came through, if it was a chlorinated organic chemical, it would sort of raise a red flag. Mm-hmm. And they would say, go test it. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, EDF was started, people interested and concerned about DDT, a chlorinated organic chemical. Why didn't anybody think perhaps back then, maybe brominated and maybe fluoridated organic chemicals might also be bad? But it took decades later before the brominated flame retardants became a concern, and then even later for the fluorinated ones. I mean, these are very closely related chemicals. I mean, it wouldn't have taken an Einstein to think back then that if chlorinated organics are bad, maybe brominated and fluoridated organics might be bad also.
Yeah, I agree. That is the story in part of the flame retardants too. But I mean, you can tell the story in different pesticide classes too. So.
But isn't it it's also the story of regulation. So you put a regulation, and what do people do? They get 1 foot over the line, so we can't use one product. And you're right. I mean, you suddenly say this is a minor change to the formulation, but it takes you, it's like tax policy. It takes you just over the line, so you're legal. And in your guts, you know it's not a big enough a change to really do away with the human health issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
To follow up on your thing about Roundup, I guess I don't follow. What's the next step to that? I mean, just because it's a likely carcinogen, so what? What happens next?
Well, so that's an international decision, right? So it doesn't have necessarily immediate implications here in the U.S. I think the EPA is going to there's a lot of pressure for it to update its risk assessment. It could lead to some restrictions in use. It's a pretty high evidentiary bar to get there. You have to have human data. So you have to have a combination of animal data and human data, which is why that decision was a big one. There's a lot of resistance, as you may not be surprised, in some circles here in the United States for listening to anything that comes out of European decision-making bodies. I think we could probably see that our national toxicology program take it up as well. This will all take time, but it's certainly going to raise the bar in terms of looking at the data.
Does that mean it's banned in Europe?
Actually, I don't know what the standards are for Europe.
On
Did your consumer
glyphosate?
report? Yeah.
I don't think there is a standard yet. There's concern, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's actionable.
And to do anything here, the burden of proof is on the EPA.
Here, the burden of, well, so for pesticides, you actually have to get them registered, so it is the burden, there's a pretty high burden on industry.
No, but it's already, I mean, Roundup's already used, and so now the burden of...
On the industry. I mean, sorry, you're right, on the agency, yep.
How long does Roundup maintain its toxicity?
Oh, I don't know.
Till it
Sorry,
kills you.
it's too specific for me. I mean, it's thought to, its original thought was that it breaks down quickly.
Pretty quickly, but it seems to me now that the consensus is there are some bad things that last longer than Monsanto would have you believe.
Well, or that it has properties that they wouldn't want, you know. So maybe its aquatic toxicity is low, but it's carcinogenic. I'm sorry, I don't know its profile very well. Well,
in terms of the industry, the environmental effort, is there a green group that focuses particularly on these issues? And so within the spectrum of environmental advocacy organizations, these 3 or these 10 are the group that really is mobilizing?
On Roundup?
Well, on the issues you've presented.
Oh, in addition to EDF? It would be, I mean, you know, the main groups that still focus on the issue of toxics, sort of larger environmental groups are Environmental Defense Fund, NRDC. In some levels, you're talking about food, anything related to food. There's kind of different groups, Consumers Union, the Center for Science and the Public Interest, Union of Concerned Scientists, the Environmental Working Group, and then there are obviously lots of local and state-based groups that continue to do this work, you know, that focus more on their communities as opposed to at the national federal level. But those are the groups that still focus at the national federal level. There are other groups that used to have toxic programs that don't anymore, like World Wildlife Fund. Not a lot of groups that focus on this issue as it relates to wildlife health as much anymore. I think it's when this issue sort of started with wildlife health and then human health, and not as much of a focus there. So I think we're out of time, but thank you so much for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you. And I just want to let you know, Tom and Sarah are going to be here for a few more minutes if you want to ask them other questions. And folks on the line, thank you for joining us. If you have any further questions, you can email me, Chris Weikel, at cweikel@edf.org. Thank you for joining us.